Hello, my name is Sarah Ferranti, and this is my presentation on vulnerable populations and risk factors. The vulnerable populations that I'll be discussing today include those living in poverty, those with mental health issues, homelessness, addiction, violence, infectious disease, migrant health, and rural health. I'll be discussing how these 8 risk factors contribute to vulnerability and the contributing factors that increase the risk for vulnerability. I'm going to start with poverty, which I've paired together with mental health and homelessness because often these 3 are interrelated. Further, poverty, mental health, and homelessness can be linked to addiction and violence, as well as infectious disease. So poverty, the contributing factors, I've linked them down here at the bottom. Access to healthcare, meaning they have a decreased access to healthcare. They have a lower socioeconomic status. They have a lack of basic needs. They have poor nutrition. They have increased exposure to the elements. And sometimes they can have language or cultural barriers. Right below that, mental health. Often mental health is a contributing factor to poverty or vice versa. Poverty could be a contributing factor to mental health. And mental health is often linked with addiction and violence. Those both paired to risky behavior, which can lead to poor decision making, such as promiscuity, which can lead to infectious diseases such as STIs and HIV. Mental health also is linked to a decreased access to healthcare. In my area, mental health services are lacking, and we have an increase of homelessness and mental health issues. Often people with mental health issues have a lower socioeconomic status because they have a hard time maintaining jobs if their mental health isn't under control. And that can lead to homelessness, which can lead to a lack of basic needs. And that cycle will just continue. Mental health can also be linked way over here to fear to seek help or to get help or to seek care, often because they don't think they need it or they don't know that anyone can help them. Moving on to homelessness, which I've already interrelated to poverty and mental health, addiction, and violence, and infectious disease, we have the same sorts of processes: limited access to healthcare, low socioeconomic status, lack of basic needs, risky behavior, poor nutrition, exposure to elements, fear to seek care. Basically, homelessness is related to all these contributing factors in one way or another. Moving on to addiction, we've already discussed the risky behaviors that can lead to poor decisions and infectious disease, but often addiction can increase violence in the home or can be a contributing factor to domestic violence and to assault and other types of violent acts. Often those who are in addiction, who do have an addiction, have a lower socioeconomic status. They have poor coping mechanisms and they use addiction to cope. And we've already discussed the relation to infectious disease, such as STIs and HIV. I'm going to move over here to migrant health. Migrant health, they're strongly correlated with rural health, which a contributing factor is exposure to elements, which increases the risk to infectious diseases such as tuberculosis and valley fever, which isn't always infectious. Valley fever is very big in my area, which has a high population of migrant health workers in rural parts of Santa Maria. Migrant health is also strongly correlated with language and cultural barriers to healthcare, as well as access to healthcare. They're often uninsured, or they're afraid to go get help because they fear that they'll be reported to immigration. Finally, rural health related to migrant health, but also if you go into some of the rural areas that are primarily Caucasian, they are also exposed to the elements, increasing their risk for infectious disease. They do have a different culture than those living in urban areas, so there could be some cultural barriers there. Perhaps things like having home births, doing more homeopathic type remedies for illnesses. They can also be linked to poor nutrition and perhaps even a lack of basic needs if they don't have clean running water or like clean septic for waste disposal. Their access to healthcare can be limited, maybe not because of insurance, but because they have to travel an hour or so to the closest hospital. And often their socioeconomic status is lower income. I think the overall picture of this chart is just to see how these different risk factors contribute to each other and that they move in a cycle. And part of Healthy People 2020s is to reduce each and every one of these in our populations and to reduce the health disparities that exist among them. And as nurses, as public health nurses, our best resource is education for them. Education and helping them with finding the resources in their areas. And just within all of that, making sure we're being culturally sensitive. Thank you for listening. Here's my references. Thank you.